Aloha and welcome to the Biomes video. In this video, we'll discuss how solar energy and weather influence the ecosystem. We'll give some examples of land biomes and we'll identify some different aquatic biomes. Okay, when we're talking about biomes, we have to compare and contrast and talk about weather and climate. Weather is an instantaneous snapshot of what's going on outside. Climate is when we look at it over the long time. So there's a time component into climate that we want to see. Now, what causes changes in the weather or what causes the weather? Well, it would be uneven heating of the Earth's surface. So because we're tilted like this, we get a little bit less sunlight at the poles than we do down at the tropics. And we'll notice some variations there. And this uneven heating makes some pockets of air warmer than others, and that's what causes weather. But weather is instantaneous. It's how is it today? How is it right now? Climate's when we factor in this time component and put it this way. And one of the things I want to mention is we hear an awful lot about climate change and things like that and how we're affecting the climate of the earth. The reason for that is not because we have control over the weather and not because we have control over the climate, but some of the pollutants that we're releasing, and namely carbon dioxide, is changing the atmospheric chemistry, and that's causing a variation in climate. So it's actually going to get a little bit warmer in some places, which might actually make it colder in others. Okay, so when we talk about terrestrial biomes, terrestrial means land. So these are the different places in land to live on. And remember that biomes are going to be weather over long periods of time, give us our climate. So these biomes are going to be these vast areas that share the same kind of climate conditions. Now, the first one, we'll start off at the equator, is our tropical forests, and you'll hear these as a tropical rainforest. These are going to be high temperatures, lots of moisture often, and lots of species of plants and organisms, lots of biodiversity in the rainforests, and you hear about that kind of stuff. Coming out from there, what we have is the savanna, and savanna are going to be large areas of land with grasses. Okay, so we're going to see large grazing animals, and we see that a lot, like in Africa, where you have the African savanna and you have the wildebeest migrations and things of that nature. When you get down to low rainfall, now we're talking about a desert, and that's where the organisms are adapted to save water. Most deserts tend to be warm, but we do have some cold deserts as well, and it's just primarily determined by the amount of rainfall that they get. We also have a chaparral, and a chaparral is kind of like if we mixed these two together, kind of sort of is what we'd end up with. You get really rainy winters, really dry summer, and it's not a grassland, it's more of a shrubland, and we'll see where those are located as well. We're moving out away from the equator, we get to our temperate grasslands, and that's going to have large areas of grass, highly fertile soil, and that's like the American Midwest, and we'll show you that on a map. And then we also have our temperate deciduous forests. And our deciduous forests are where we have our hot summers, cold winters, lots of rain. Deciduous trees are those that they'll shed their leaves. Mammals tend to hibernate. So back east, we see a lot of this where we have a nice hardwood forest that's there in the summertime, and in the wintertime, it loses its leaves and the animals tend to hibernate away. Going a little further away, we get to our coniferous forests, and that's where we have our cone-bearing trees. We have more snow. It generally is a little bit cooler, and those pine-like needles, the leaves they have there are going to allow them to adapt to that change in temperature. And then ultimately we get to the tundra, and the tundra is going to be cold, but it's also going to be dry. We don't have very many trees, and we have a lot of what they call permafrost. And permafrost is where the ground is frozen all the time. So only certain organisms can get roots down into that and extract out water from that. So it's an interesting biome to look at. So these are our terrestrial biomes. In the next couple of slides, what we're going to do is just kind of flip through and show you where they are in a representative picture of them. So let's go take a look at some of these. First up, going back down to the tropics, we're going to see our tropical forests, okay, and these can be our rainforests. And what we'll notice is they're going to be in the tropics here. You'll see it here. And most of these areas, they're going to get a lot of rainfall. And that's what keeps them lush and green, and you can see it here. The interesting thing about tropical forests is they tend to be layered. So you'll have some ground cover here, you'll have some intermediate plants that'll give you another layer here, you'll have the normal tree layer here, and then you have some of these super plants that go super tall and form another layer. So in the rainforests, you have these multiple layers here, and you can see where you have more areas for biodiversity. Next up are the savannas, and you can see the savannas here tend to be in the tropics as well. Okay, and it's going to be a large kind of a grassland, lots of migrating animals, and pronounced wet and dry seasons. So those are our savannas. Continuing our little exploration, we get to our deserts, and you're familiar, we live one here in Las Vegas, but we'll also see the deserts are going to be here, and what marks the deserts is going to be this lack of rainfall. So even if we're high up in the Andes Mountains here, the reason that it's a desert is this lack of water, and because of that, the plant life is going to be sparse. It's going to be like spread out a little bit. Those plants that are there have the ability to retain and store water longer, so they're able to live there. The next one are the chaparrals, and the chaparrals we'll see like on the California coast here, and that's kind of like a shrubland. So they get a little bit more water than a grassland would, but still it's kind of a harsh place to live. We see a lot of it here in southern Europe. Northern Africa will have a little bit as well, and that's where you'll go out and see a lot of shrubs, so intermediately sized plants, not big tall trees, but not the grasses either. Moving on a little further, we get to our temperate grasslands, and we'll see those, like I said, in the Midwest of America here. We also see it down here in Argentina. We'll see it around in Australia, and then over here we see it in Asia as well. And the grasslands are very fertile regions. These are where you have a lot of fertile soil because the grass grows, it dies, it breaks down, it returns the nutrients to the soil, and it just makes this really good soil for us. And this is where we could actually produce the food that we would need for the species to feed the entire world. We could do that just using the grasslands. We also have the temperate deciduous forests, and you'll notice it's back like on the eastern half of the United States. We'll see it there, primarily through Europe here, and then we also see it here on the east coast of Asia. And here we have our deciduous trees. Those are going to be green in the summertime, and then it's a colder winter time, and the plants will lose their leaves. They drop their leaves, the animals hibernate, so it's kind of where we see the changing of colors and things of that nature. All right, keeping moving, we get to the taiga or the coniferous forests, and notice those are going to be a little bit closer to the poles. Okay, it'll also be in a little bit higher elevations is where we start seeing the pine trees, and that's what we're talking about, these being here. And then ultimately we get up to the tundra, and you'll see the tundra here, and that's a region where we have permafrost. So the ground is permanently frozen, not a lot of plant life there. You can see it's very sparsely populated. You might get some grasses growing in the warmer seasons, but it never really truly gets warm enough to have an extended growing season to allow trees and shrubs and things of that nature to grow. Okay, so the last area that we want to talk about in this video is going to be the aquatic biomes. The ocean is going to be broken into two different regions when we're talking about depth, but then there's also different regions when we're talking about the bottom. When we're talking about depth, we have the photic zone, and the photic zone goes down to about 200 meters, and that's about how deep that sunlight goes down. So you can actually have photosynthesis, you can actually see, there's light there that you can see what's going on. Below that is the aphotic zone, where it's so deep that sunlight can't penetrate through that much water, so that's where it gets to be dark and you don't have any photosynthesis, and you have some really weird creatures and things living down there because of the pressure. So we can set it up that way. Now we can also divide the ocean by what's the bottom like. So we have our open ocean where it's so deep. Okay, so you won't get down to the abyssal plain. It's so deep that it's just basically an open ocean community. There's not like there's a bottom. It's so deep it doesn't come into play. We can have a benthic zone here where it's going to be kind of deep. Generally going down the continental shelf is where we get our benthic zone here. We'll have our coastal zone, which is going to be over the continental shelf. And then ultimately we have the intertidal, which is the area between low tide and high tide, and maybe extends out a little bit beyond that. But that's what we're talking about. So we can define it by where the bottom is and how deep the water is, but also by how much light it gets, or if it gets light at all. There's also freshwater aquatic biomes. We have rivers, lakes, streams, estuaries, things of that nature. The lessons will go into those a little bit more in detail for you. So have fun with that. Good luck with the lessons. And as always, we'll see you in the next video.